You're only as good as your last fight. Now that's a phrase that's thrown around combat sports, MMA, boxing. It's thrown around there a lot, and it has a very simple meaning. I'll explain it very briefly. If you lost your last fight, then you're washed up. If you won your last fight, then you're the best thing since sliced bread, and that's tends to be how it goes. Fans are very fickle in that manner, as are the public opinion in general. You'll notice that across a lot of things, and I wanted to bring that up because it's very important in the realm that we're dealing with, that is comic books, whether it be manga or American comic books. Now, with the digital age, you have a little bit of a. You're throwing it on its head a little bit because something like JoJo, something that's heavily serialized, like an anime like My Hero, One Piece, any of those titles that come to mind, is you have Netflix, you have streaming services. So while it could be popular for any given point in time, whenever a new part comes out, whenever a new series comes out, when the ending happens, it's going to be popular with later generations because, well, they find it on streaming, and then their friends find it, and they, oh, well, my older brother watched that, or my older sister, or actually, at this point in time, well, my dad watched that, my mom watched that, or they both watched that, that's how they got married, that's how they had me, they were One Piece fans. Could you imagine? Anyway, you kind of see my point. Is longevity is longer now than it was at a certain point. They talk about it a lot with The Office. You'll notice a lot of those cast members are riding off of their success with that 20-year-old almost show. You have younger fans coming up to the new actors. You look like this character, but you're a lot older. You're not them. They're way prettier than you are. They're way better looking than you. And you get those funny stories. And so why do I bring that quote into this equation? I bring it into this because we're at a point in comic books, we're at a point in media, as a matter of fact, where independence is more prevalent than it ever had been before. And as far as comic books are concerned, the most successful independent comic books are put out every couple years. Let's take some of the big names in the crowdfunding scene. Let's take some of the smaller names, as a matter of fact. There's a young artist by the name of I believe, Joshua Live. His name is Joshua. We know that. I can at least tell you that. He has published a comic book on Indiegogo called Amarok. Now, this kid has phenomenal line work. He has grit. He has determination. He has a professional inker. He has Brett Booth advising him, as well as David Finch. He's been on the live stream with him. If you want to name drop pros in the comic book industry who are known for exceptional artwork, this kid's got a laundry list. He's got a Rolodex of these names on speed dial that he's been working with since the publication of his book. You have your boy Zach, who has the Jawbreakers. He works with Chuck Dixon, who then works with Sylvester Stallone to publish official books of Rambo, of the Expendables. And while they're not tied into the film franchises, they are books written by the man himself, Sylvester Stallone. You have Eric July, has 4 campaigns, 4 books. Each book has made no less than $1 million, some of which more than $2 million. Ethan Van Sciver regularly pulls in, I'd say, $500,000 on each Cyberfrog Rainbow the Brute launch. But there's one commonality with all these independents that will inevitably hold back comic books until it can be solved. I think Ripa is the closest to solving this problem, but it is a problem. And people don't want to talk about it like it's a problem. You will often hear Van Sciver dismiss these things, and as he has every right to do so, but it is a problem. And it is a problem that I believe, and it's a very telling problem. That problem is serialization. You're only as good as your last fight. You're only as good as your last outing. You're only as important as the last time I saw you. So what were comic books, what is manga, as a matter of fact, built on? Well, you can't compare it to music. You can't compare it to movies, box office hits, because we're not talking about that level of money. Musicians can be popular forever with a handful of releases. You look at David Bowie, you look at Frank Sinatra, you look at some of those older guys. Well, I can now listen to them. Look at some of the newer guys, for instance. You can listen to an album from 2016 as often as you did then, and that artist is still living off that album because you could play it over and over and over again. I look closely at all these different things, and I like to see what separates them. I like to see what makes them unique. I like to see what makes them work. What makes comics work is that they're on your doorstep. They're in your hand every month. That's what brought success in comic books, because while a musician can make money off of the multiple plays, multiple concert tours where they're playing the same old hits, right? Comic book artists can't do that. Sure, I can re-release the same book, but that's after 20 years. I'm not going to do a tour doing that one book because that's not going to be enough money. I can't do a tour off of a 32-page book. I can't do a tour off of an 86-page, 100-page book. You might be able to get away with a decent amount of success with a 120-plus page graphic novel, but it's not going to be a whole lot of fun. I know that a lot of people draw comparisons to the European industry, and while that works in itself, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to put myself there. I want to put myself on the major hits like they have in Japan. Japan is weekly. Shonen and perhaps shoujo, I'm not completely invested. That's a weekly release. That's one of the most serialized things on the planet, that they have these things coming out every single week. So what's important is that in order for this industry, the comic book industry in the States, to grow, the independents, more importantly, because the independents are on the level of DC and Marvel, regardless of what you want to think, they're making as much money, they're having as many sales as the big two. You can prove that by looking at your comic book stores. You could prove that by looking at the metrics that are provided by Marvel and DC, of which are they're not that great. So when you have a guy like Ripa making $1 million minimum on each of his titles, you have a guy like Vince Guyver who's making $500,000, and you see 10,000 buys, 10,000 books sold. Captain America was selling 10,000 books about 5 years ago on the comic book store stands for Marvel. Spider-Man, there were some major characters that had billion-dollar movies out at the time that were selling as low as 10,000. Whereas when Ethan Van Sciver sells 10,000, he's making all the money in the world. He's fine. When your boy Zach sells $250,000, when your boy Zach sells 90,000 even, you might think that's not in itself a small number, but for one thing, that's pretty decent. Compare it to $1 million, okay, well now we're getting into scale here. Oh, that's small compared to $1 million, but it's not a laughable amount. Although it would be if you were selling to a store. But when you have a Van Sciver, a Ripa, a your boy Zach, a Joshua Amarok is what we'll call him, putting out a book once in between in every indefinite time, well, you can't quite get the same thing out of it, can you? You can't get the same thing as if I were to go to the store every month and get a Batman comic book and keep up with Batman and really start understanding the character and living with the character and believing that they're alive and them being in my head every month, right? You don't get the same relationship, and I think that's very important for the reader. As far as the reader is concerned, as artists, we're all pretentious. We all think, I need more time. This is my masterpiece. This is this. And we could do that all we want, but look at Jack Kirby. He's regarded as one of the best artists in comic books, not necessarily the most detailed or the finest or the most refined, but he's regarded as one of the most influential, and he's regarded as such for a reason. When you look at Jack Kirby's volume, he has thousands of pages. I believe he has almost 20,000 pages, which rivals how many pages Hirohiko Araki, the illustrator and creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, that's what Araki has now. Jack Kirby had that by the end of his career. Araki's still kicking. Araki did monthlies. Araki did weeklies. Kirby did monthlies. You have the stories of Kirby doing 8 pages a day. Nobody's asking for 8 pages a day, but we are asking for some good times with these characters. These writers, these artists, they obviously care about the characters they're creating, but if I don't get that character in my hand every single month, well, you say, oh, the new Cyberfrog, the new Expendables, the new Jawbreakers. I always get those two confused. Well, that one's coming out. Oh, well, what happened in the last one? Was the last one even... Did this happen? What? Who drew that one again? I don't quite remember. See, you're asking all these questions. That's no fun. As the reader, as the consumer of this stuff, right? Of these books. I don't want to ask those questions. I want to be able to jump into it. And if you have a 12 issue, you have a graphic novel, and you're going to take a break, the hiatus, whatever it may be, you can have those things. The problem is we don't. we don't have the, okay, it's going to be a limited run, it's going to take this long. There's no consistency in comic books anymore. And while there are a lot of people who say, well, we don't need it, I beg to differ. And you could say, well, what do you know, right? Well, what do you know? Right? The idea of having consistent books, I feel like, isn't the worst idea in the world, as it is fundamental to what we're all participating in. So I think until somebody on this independent scene can start putting out books on a regular basis, maybe quarterly, right? Once every 3 months, maybe. Well, maybe then we have something. But I think until then, it's still going to be a pretty boring time in comic books. What do you guys think?